Yes, yes, yes. I am back again with Madam Whipass Reads. I would be reading a book. I forgot the title of it, but it's about the DeBarges. It's just that I haven't gotten the book yet. And I got some free time tonight, so I'm in the mood for reading. And for tonight, I chose Donald Goines. That is the author who wrote Dope Fiend. Like every generation or like every decade, hey Trish, has like very popular authors. Why am I buffering? I don't know. But Donald Goines, I have to say, was like the first author that I was aware of when I was a kid. All the teenagers were reading books by Donald Goines, and we're talking about from the 60s. And by my time, it was the early 70s, and he was still very popular. And I was always around teenagers as a little kid because, I'm the youngest in my family. And so, when I was 5, 6, my older siblings were already teenagers, and my cousins were teenagers. And I was always around them. And Donald Goines was an author that they talked about a lot. My earliest memory of any type of drug situation in the community was heroin. And I'm going back to like 1973. I mean, dope fiends were like all over the place. And I believe it was in that year, or it might have been 74. I had some cousins. They were twins. We called them the Dadass. I don't know why they were called the Dadass, but they were 16 at the time. And one of them was found they lived in one of those projects in the Bronx. And one of them was found dead, overdosed on heroin in the stairwell. And I just remember it being a very tragic and traumatic time in the family when they found one of the dadas dead in the stairwell, 16 years old. And on my block I grew up, there was an apartment building. There were only studio apartments, and it was 2 stories, so there's probably about 10 on each floor. And a lot of dope fiends used to be in there. And as I sit back and think, I remember one lady. I couldn't tell you how old she was, but I remember being 6 years old, and she would be sitting down on the step of the apartment building, doped up or whatever. And she would ask me to go to the store and get her something, and she'd give me the money for it. The store was like a few doors down, and I'd go and get it for her. I remember spending a lot of time just sitting down with her and talking and helping her out. And I didn't know what she was going through or what was going on, but as I closed my eyes, I could see the image of, she would be foaming at the mouth, like white stuff, and she'd have tissue in her hand, but she'd be nodding out, and I would just take the tissue out of her hand and wipe her mouth for her. 6 years old. It just makes me think of how much, even as a child, I was always being a servant to others, always trying to help somebody, even as a little child. And I just remember my father, we were not allowed to go in that building. And, just some early memories of me. So I wanted to introduce some of you to Donald Goines and refamiliarize others with Donald Goines. I'm reading on the back of the book. It says it's fiction, but it's based on a personal experience. For 23 years of his young life, Donald Goines lived in the dark, despair-ridden world of the junkie. It started during his military service in Korea and ended at the time of his murder with a $100 a day habit. Wow, I didn't know. And out of the agonizing hell came Dope Fiend. It's the shocking nightmare story of a black heroin addict trapped in the festering sore of a major American ghetto. A young man and a girl, both handsome, talented, and full of promise, are inexorably pulled into the living death of the hardcore junkie. Please forgive me. This book is very, very old. I'm looking. It's stamped Justice and Equality Bookshop, 192 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11213. The book cost $2.25. It's in good condition, I would say. No bent pages or anything. And it was America's #1 best-selling black author, Donald Goines. Donald Goines, savagely gunned down at the age of 39, was the undisputed master of the Black experience novel. He lived by the code of the streets and exposed in each of his 16 books, some written under the pseudonym Al C. Clarke, the rage, frustration, and torment spinning through the inner city maze. Each of the stories, classics in the Black experience genre, were drawn from reality as Donald Goines poured out the anger, guilt, and pain of a Black man in America. I'm also reminded as I'm sitting here and talking about this, and I spoke about this before, as a child, I absorbed everything. I was always in the room with older teenagers, always in the kitchen with, my parents and their friends. In those days, children were to be seen and not heard. So I was always listening and absorbing everything. And one thing about the teenagers in those days, they were very socially conscious. And I remember conversations verbatim of teenagers, 16, 17 to 19, sitting around uh, pontificating about issues in their community and solutions. Teenagers' conversations in those days were very profound. And when I listen to teenagers, the conversation of teenagers today, it's like night and day. They're not concerned of what's going on around them. Their conversations uh, are about social media, of course, video games, red bottom shoes, uh, the celebrities of housewives and all of that. And much of their conversation pertains to what's being talked about in hip hop, whatever Cardi B is rapping about. I ain't gotta dance no more. I ain't gotta strip no more. They're talking about these things. So when people say music has no influence over the youth or society, that's bullshit. Because the teenagers of the time when I was a kid, as I said, they were very socially conscious, but they were listening to very socially conscious music. Marvin Gaye. What is that? Gil Scott Heron. Did I say that right? People of that nature where, they talked about stuff. So therefore, the conversation of the teenagers reflected what was being sung and what was spoken word in music. Well, I'm going to get on to reading. And I'm turning to the first page where I just read this stamp, the way this book came from. And it says, the white powder looked innocent as it lay there in the open, but this was the drug of the damned, the curse of mankind. Really? Well, crack and meth was not in existence at the time this book was written. By the way, what year was this book written? Let me see if I can find any type of hint of it before I continue. Pardon me for a second. Let me see if I can find a date or something. Published, 1971. It was copywritten in 1971 by the Holloway House Publishing Company. Okay, so in 1971, according to Donald Goines, the drug of the damned was heroin. Honey, mm, mm, mm. Heroin, what some call smack, others junk, snow, stuff, poison, horse. It had different names, but the same effect. To all of its users, to all of the dope fiends in the Detroit ghetto, it was slow death. To Katie, who I once hoped would be beside me. Chapter 1. The voices. Wait, hold on. Let me turn on another light. So yeah, you're gonna hear some chirping in the background because that's my smoke detector. But I suppose, you know what? We did not finish the Scott Peterson read. I didn't think anybody was that interested, but you know what? I'll get back to that. Okay. Chapter 1. The voices inside the flat were loud as the argument continued. Porky, black and horribly fat, stared around his domain with small red reptilian eyes. His apartment was his castle. His world consisted of the narrow confines of the four walls that surrounded him. In his huge armchair, he would sit watching the drug addicts come and go. They entertained him, not intentionally, but nevertheless they did. And when they came to his shooting gallery and begged for credit, it gave him the feeling of power. Also, they didn't have crack houses because they weren't doing crack. Crack wasn't in existence. But, you know, we got crack houses, trap houses. But in those days, they were called shooting galleries because that's where you go and shoot up heroin. Okay, gotcha. With the women addicts, he enjoyed himself even more. When they were short of money, his fiendish mind came up with newer and more abnormal acts for them to entertain him with. He set aside, now you know what that means. I'm sorry. You see, forgive me, you know, I stop and go at times, but I just can't let this slide. He says, when they were short of money, his fiendish mind came up with newer and more abnormal acts for them to entertain him with. Now, do you see how you have to use your imagination and you know exactly what he's talking about? That's the beauty of artists, whether it was music or writing or whatever. You know, they left a lot to your imagination. Whereas today, they're just so graphic. If he was Donald Goines of today, he probably would have wrote something like, yeah, he would have bitches bent over and he would be sticking broom, you know, you get the picture. He set aside the book he had been glancing through, laying it down in such a way that he could glance at the large technicolor pictures of a horse and woman faking an act of copulation. Oh, I spoke too soon. I got you, Nia. The four addicts who had just brought forth a dope brought wait, the four addicts who had just brought a fourth of dope from his doorman were deep in an argument over who would use the two sets of works first. The rest of the tools were already in use by other addicts. "Here, baby," a dope fiend yelled across the room. "One of you can use my works just as long as you don't stop them up." He hesitated, then added, "Just make sure you clean them out when you finish using them." To emphasize his point, he stuck the works back down in a glass of water sitting next to him and drew up a dropper full of water. He slowly skeeted it out on the floor, making sure the needle wasn't stopped up before loaning it out. "When you return them, Gene, make sure they work as good as they do now." He skeeted some more water out of the needle, showing the woman that his tools weren't stopped up. Porky watched their behavior without any show of emotion. It didn't disturb him to see bloody water skeeted on his floor, since it was already littered with cigarette butts and bloody toilet tissue. Ugh. The floor of the apartment had pools of blood on it, from where addicts had tried to get a hit, but the works had stopped up and they had pulled the needle out, leaving a flowing trail of blood that dropped down from their arms or necks and settled on the floor. From the accumulation of filth and old dried up blood, the house had a reeking odor that was nauseous to anyone who hadn't smelled it before. Jean, a tall brown skinned addict who looked 10 years older than her 20 years, grabbed the works out of Joe's outstretched hand. Her face was still attractive, but one would discern marks of dissipation in it. Her lips were drawn down in a perpetual dope fiend frown. Porky wet his huge blubberish lips in anticipation. Jean was one of the few female addicts to come to his apartment who had trouble finding a vein to hit in. Because of this problem, she hit in the inner part of her thigh. He watched her greedily as she prepared to hit in the groin. She cooked up her dope in a large bottle top, almost burning her fingers when the top became too hot to hold, but not hot enough to make her drop her dope. She slowly rolled up a piece of cotton and dropped it inside the cooker. She drew the heroin up through the cotton, and as her fingers moved delicately with the dropper, her eyes came up and she caught Porky's eyes following her every motion. Her small mouth tightened sarcastically. She realized that he would continue to watch until she was finished, but she was far past the stage where she was concerned about such a small matter as a man looking under her dress. The only concern she had at the moment was whether or not she could get a hit. Without any embarrassment whatsoever, she pulled up her short skirt until it was above her hips, revealing the absence of panties, while displaying the tangled mass of dark hairs on her pubic mound. Anxiously, she began to run her finger up and down until she could feel the vein she was searching for. And without hesitation, she plunged the dull needle down into her groin. And there was a blue-black scar on the inside of her thigh, which at closer observation was revealed to be needle marks from where she had hit before. And in the middle of the track, she plunged the needle into a small abscess. And as she pushed and pulled on the needle trying to find the hit, pus ran out of the sore and down her leg. Jesus Christ. Ugh. Porky watched the dark, fertile thighs with hunger. Really? Abscesses and pus running down her thigh? And you're hungry for that? He had had Jean on many occasions, but she still aroused him with her complete disregard for what other people thought. He remembered the time she had put on a freak show with one of his large German police dogs. She had performed in the front room before everyone without any hesitation. Just the mention of the fourth of dope he was giving her set her right to work. The vivid picture of her and the dog on the floor came back to his mind, and he grabbed himself and rocked back and forth. Small sounds of pleasure escaped from him as he imagined a dog between her black thighs. I spoke too soon. With an expression of exquisite pleasure, Jean sat back in her chair and she worked the dropper slowly, then let it fill back up with blood. And when the blood reached the top of the dropper, she backed it up into her veins, working the blood in the dropper slowly as she jacked the works off. After she repeated this act over and over again, the junkie who had loaned her the works yelled, "I done told you, bitch, not to stop up my works. You keep jacking them off, they gonna sure as hell stop up." Joe stood up and stared at her angrily. He was tall, thin, with dark features. His hair was still his hair still held the accumulation of debris from where he had slept. Jean pulled the needle out slowly. A look of rapture filled her face. She looked up and noticed Porky holding himself and watching her, her eyes filled with scorn. She opened her legs wide and stretched herself. I'm sorry, and scratched herself. "Why don't you come over here, Porky, and let me run some of this coochie?" It don't say coochie, but "up against your fat black face." She spoke in a slow, tantalizing voice, all the while rubbing the sides of her cunt. I spoke way too soon. I guess they got graphic back in those days too. My bad. The sight was beyond vulgarity. It was grotesque, even sickening, because as she sat there with her legs wide, a stream of blood mixed with pus ran slowly down her thigh. I hope none of you are eating at this time, because I got to tell you, my stomach is turning a little bit. Give me a second. Porky watched her as though he was in a trance. He licked his lips and moaned. Jesus, what the fuck is wrong with— Oh, they high. I'm sorry. No need for me to ask. His breathing became heavy and loud in the wide, spacious. Hot Rod said, "I guess I'm at the wrong party. Peace, Neil." "Don't go, Hot Rod. Come back." That was pretty disgusting. I don't really blame you, actually. Oh, God. His breathing became heavy and loud in the wide, spacious front room of the apartment. Most of the addicts sitting on the couches watched him with contempt if they weren't nodding too much to see. To them, Porky was just a fat freak with good dope. They used him the same way they would use anyone else to get their fix. They tried to play on his weakness. "Bitch," Joe yelled at the woman as he walked over and snatched up his bloody works. "You done let all the motherfucking blood dry in my spike." He stared at her coldly. "A dope fiend bitch ain't shit," he stated, and then walked back across the room and began to clean his tools out. A circus, Porky thought, as he watched another girl cross the room and sit down on the floor between Jean's legs. She raised her lips and kissed Jean's thigh. Her short skirt rose high on her hips as she nestled between Jean's spreading legs. As she raised her arm to stroke Jean's leg, a swarm of sores were revealed. On closer inspection, a person could see that each of the sores was an open abscess. The sleeves of her light-colored blouse were spotted with dry blood. And as he watched, Porky's eyes began to roll. He reached down inside his pants and rubbed vigorously. The addicts watched Porky, anxiously hoping that he didn't reach a climax too soon. And they knew that at times, when Porky felt freakiest, He might set enough dope out for everyone. Suddenly, Jean dropped her skirt and stood up. Her eyes went across the room to Porky. His face was covered with sweat, while his double chin hung down quivering. His cheeks had become so fat that they were hung down around his neck. Set some dope out, Porky, Jean said in an unconcerned tone. If you want to watch a freak show, lay it out, baby. Her face was hawk-like, with sharp black eyes. And with instant control, Porky pulled himself together. His beady eyes glittered with animal cunning. Where before there had been lust, now only cruelty could be seen. Smokey, he yelled. His voice seemed shrill for such a huge person. The bedroom door opened and a slim, dark-skinned woman in her early 30s came out. She had a look about her as though she had seen all the horrors that life could reveal and then experienced them. Her skin was dry and wrinkled, while her eyes had a flat, dead look about them, and she moved across the room as though she was floating. The dope fiends watched Smokey out of the corners of their eyes, and they knew it was the end of their thoughts of free dope. With Smokey there, nothing would be given away. The addicts, men and women alike, thought of Smokey as one of the dirtiest-hearted black bitches alive. This is kind of interesting, isn't it? Her eyes traveled around the room, missing nothing. Wherever she glanced, the addict who caught Smokey's eye quickly looked away. Smokey had tricked her way out of a cotton field in Georgia when she was 13. By the time she reached New York a year later, she was a professional whore and dope fiend. Wow. She took in Porky's appearance with a glance. His hand was still buried inside his pants. She removed his hand as she sat down on his huge lap and put her small hand behind her back and reached down inside his pants. She manipulated her fingers dexterously as she swept the room with a cold glance. Her shrewd stare took in the blood dropping on the floor as one of the dope fiends nodded with a spike in his arm. In the corner, another addict was lying on the floor while his companion kneeled over him. His cheeks were puffed up as he tried to build up the vein in his neck. Slowly, he let out the air, then turned his head as his friend felt his neck, feeling for the vein. Using a size 28 needle extra long, the addict's friend, Junior, stuck the long needle deeply into his partner's neck. Missing the vein, he removed the needle quickly and felt his friend's neck again. He held the vein with his middle finger and pushed the needle back into his companion's neck. Now, you know that's a friend, huh? I'm from New York. Suddenly, blood began to flow up into the dropper, letting the man know that he had made a direct hit. He removed the dropper from the needle, leaving the needle still protruding from the addict's neck. Ugh. He squirted the water out of the dropper and drew up some heroin from a top that was carefully placed beside the man on the floor. Gently, he replaced the dropper into the needle that was sticking out of his friend's neck, waiting until blood flowed up in the dropper again before releasing the drug slowly. Waiting for the reflow of blood was the only way he had of knowing if the works had stopped on him or not while he was changing stuff in the dropper. Twice more, Junior refilled the dropper from the top and ran the heroin into his partner's neck. He picked the top up and wiggled the dropper around, using it to suck up the last of the dope in the cotton. Junior had a good hit because while the dropper was removed, blood gushed out of the open end of the needle. He stuck the dropper into the needle and ran the last of the dope. And when he pulled the needle out, blood ran down the dope fiend's neck as he stretched out on the floor. It didn't disturb the addict, though. He just lay there until his partner used some toilet paper to wipe the blood from his neck. Porky let out a loud groan and his monstrous body jerked uncontrollably. Smokey removed her hand and wiped it on her dirty skirt. She stuck her hand down the inside of her bra and removed a small package and opened it. The white powder looked innocent as it lay there in the open, but this was the drug of the damned, the curse of mankind. Heroin, what some call smack, others junk, snow, stuff, poison, horse. It had different names, but it still had the same effect. To all of its users, it was slow death. Smokey stood up and swept the room with her brutal stare. Most of the addicts looked away. She was one of them, and they knew there was no story they could tell her because she had heard them all. How long have I been reading? Because I don't want to make this too long. That was chapter 1. I want to know more about Smokey. She's a bitch. All right. The couple in the automobile were still arguing when the man driving parked in front of Porky's house. From outside, the house looked innocent enough. A small two-family flat with the downstairs flat boarded up. There were boards all over the windows in the downstairs apartment, giving it the impression of having been closed for quite a while. Once there had been a fence around the place, but like many houses on the east side of Detroit, the fence had gone first, then the grass had followed. Now there were only a few fence posts remaining in random spots around the front of the house. Teddy glanced at the small woman sitting beside him. "Terry, give me those other $2 and I'll get a $10 pack for us." The woman sitting behind him had the looks of a small doll. She was tiny, just under 5 feet, with jet black hair that hung down around her shoulders. Her skin had a golden hue about it, impossible to acquire unless you were fortunate enough to be born with it. Her eyes, when she glanced up at the man with her, were bright and glittered with the joy of life and the happiness of being a woman in love. All of her features were small, and she had a habit of sticking her tongue out between her beautifully curved lips whenever she was deep in thought. Her smile held the promise of sweet sensuality and inward delights for the man lucky enough to receive her attention. At his words, Terry puckered her mouth in a tight frown. "I can't do that, Teddy. I've got to have gas money so I can drive back and forth to work." She crossed her legs, revealing lovely tan thighs. "Besides," she continued, "I already gave you $8 out of the $10 bill I borrowed from Mama, and I was supposed to make it I was supposed to make it last me the rest of the week." "Oh, baby," Teddy whined. He stuck his lip out like a small child. Terry squinted up her nose. "Shit, Teddy, you don't need all that dope anyway." For a moment, Teddy was too occupied considering the gas gauge to reply. "You got enough gas, Terry, to get to work and back," he said. "Come on, let's run up to Porky's and get a little blow." Again, she frowned. "Damn, Teddy, you know I don't want to go upstairs in that nasty house. That smell makes me sick. Plus, that nasty fat black bastard always tries to look up under my dress." She made a small gesture with her hand, then continued, "Teddy, you know I hate the sight of all those people lying around on that dirty floor with blood running all down their arms and legs. No, thank you, baby. I can think of 1,000 things I'd rather do this day than go up in that funky house. So please, Daddy, don't ask me to go up there with you. I'd rather wait in the car." Teddy didn't even bother to listen to what she had to say. If she didn't go up, he didn't have to give her any of the dope. But then again, if she went with him, he stood a better chance of hitting Porky up for a little credit. He tossed the idea around in his head. He was well aware of the fact that Porky was interested in Terry, but for that matter, Porky was interested in anything with a skirt on, and that didn't just go for women. Really? I know I read this book before. I might have been 11 or 12, but I really didn't understand what the hell I was reading. But I read this book before, and it feels like I'm reading this book for the first time. Come on, he ordered, making his mind up at once. With Terry along, he just might be able to get enough stuff so he wouldn't have to go out hustling the rest of the day. It was worth the chance. He didn't have anything to lose by trying. Terry shrugged. She knew that sound in his voice. It was always better to give in when Teddy spoke like that, because if she didn't, she ran a chance of getting slapped down, or worse, they would end up arguing the rest of the day until she went to work. She climbed out of the small, compact car, grumbling under her breath, and waited until Teddy came around the car. The look she tossed him was full of anger, but there was no bidding the love she held for her man. They were both just about the same size, with the same golden brown complexions. At first sight, many people would take them to be brother and sister. He flashed his brilliant smile at her when he reached the sidewalk. Sometimes it made her happy just to be allowed to run with him. She didn't really care when he didn't take her anywhere. What she wanted was the enjoyment of just being with her man. You black men in Detroit are something else, Terry said as she grabbed his arm. If I can only figure out a way to get him away from all this dope, she thought as she clutched his arm. She remembered the beautiful times they had together before Teddy started using. She wondered again for the thousandth time if Teddy had a habit. She really wondered that, huh? Okay. He claimed he didn't, but she didn't know. For one thing, she didn't know that much about dope to be able to tell if he had one or not. She believed he was becoming strung out if he wasn't hooked yet. At the rate he was going, it was just a matter of time. If she could figure out some way to stop him from using, things would be just like they used to be. The little amount of heroin she took when she was out with him was nothing. She believed she was too strong to become addicted. Actually, the only reason she took the stuff was that Teddy liked her to turn on at times when he did. But other than that, she really didn't like the stuff. Sometimes it made her sick. She could never hold any food in her stomach. Teddy took her arm and led her up the sidewalk towards the house. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eyes. Self-consciously, she noticed again that she was taller than he was whenever she wore her heels. She made a mental note not to wear her heels when he picked her up unless they were going out somewhere. The thought of going out somewhere made her smile. They hadn't even been to a movie in the last month. She twisted around and stared at him. His thin face with his keen nose, topped off by his deep, fierce, cold black eyes, was a woman's dream. His eyes gave him the look of a hunting eagle. And when they reached the porch steps, she stopped. "I'll follow you," she said, and stood waiting patiently until Teddy went up the stairs first. They entered the frame house and went up the rickety stairway, and by the time they reached the top, someone was already watching their approach out of one of the small peepholes that had been cut in the door of Porky's apartment. Terry wrinkled up her nose as the smell from the flat came to her. It was a sickening odor. Still blood, with whatever else happened to be on the floor. She wondered how the people living there could adjust to such an odor. She remembered the first time she had come up these steps with Teddy. The odor had been so strong she had almost vomited. Before Teddy could knock, they heard someone remove the 2x4 that was kept across the door. Wow. and then the door opened slowly. That was a flashback. Whose house used to have a 2x4 across their door? Pardon me, I'm having a childhood memory. Hmm. Who had a 2x4 across the door? A feeling of nausea began to invade her soul as she entered the apartment. Terry swallowed, fighting down the sickness. For some reason, it was always this way when she entered this flat, or what she sometimes called jokingly the room of horror. The doorman closed the door behind them and replaced the large 2x4 across the doorway. Terry's sharp, dark eyes darted around like flying sparrows as she scanned the room. It was the same as usual, the only difference being that the people changed. Other than that, they were doing the same things. It's like stepping into another world, she thought, as she stared around at the addicts, nodding and searching for veins to shoot the dope in. The people were strange. Men and women alike, scratching whatever part of their body itched, no matter who might be watching. She stared at two white boys who would have been conspicuous in any other all-black environment, but here the color problem didn't really exist. A dope fiend was a dope fiend, whether he was black or not. If he had the money and was cool with Porky, he could relax and shoot his dope. Teddy grinned as Porky's voice came booming across the room. It was an artificial grin, one that many junkies have complete control of. Always smile when the pusher speaks. Very seldom can he do anything wrong. Well, 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 look who's finally came and visited little me. Little me. Porky yelled from the bedroom doorway. They both turned in time to see Porky waddling out of the bedroom towards them. His fat face seemed to be the epitome of happiness as he crossed the living room floor towards them. Teddy, you naughty boy, you. Why have you kept, why have you been keeping this lovely child away from me? He stopped and wiped the sweat from his brow. You know how much I enjoy looking at such a cute young thing as Terry. His eyes swept up and down Terry's well-shaped body, stripping her of her clothes with his piercing pig-like eyes. She managed to fight down a shiver of horror as she returned his stare. There was no way for her to conceal the fear she had of him. It was in her eyes, and she trembled slightly as she looked away from his hungry stare. To her, he was the monstrosity. To her, he was a monstrosity, fatter than any human being had the right to be. In truth, he was a good specimen of a freak of nature, grotesque to the sight, more fantastic in appearance than the mind could imagine. Sounds like she described a ghoul that be hanging around these YouTube streets. Sounds like Tyra and Donna. With his quick insight, Porky read the fear in her eyes and it only aroused him. He rubbed himself intimately, unaware of the emotion. Terry saw it and turned her face away, paralyzed by the thought he had acted more like an animal than the huge dogs he kept in his bedroom. Say, Porky, Teddy said in his most persuading voice, I ain't got but $10, man. You think you can toss in a little gapper for me and Terry? Terry glared at him angrily. She hadn't asked for any dope, and she didn't want Porky giving her any. Instantly, she realized this was the real reason Teddy had asked her to come up with him. It was not because he really wanted her company. He only tolerated her with him because he knew Porky liked her, and he was taking advantage of that fact. She could feel herself blushing as the anger welled up inside her. She tried not to let it show as she glared at Teddy, but from the smile on Porky's face, she believed he knew just how she felt. Amused, Porky stared at Teddy. He realized that Terry was the reason why Teddy asked for more dope than he would ordinarily have asked for. It would be a cold day in hell when one of these dope fiends started to outthink him, Porky thought coldly. You know I'm going to look out for my little girl, Terry, Porky replied easily. He grinned when he noticed her flinch. Yes, he would give her all the dope she wanted, and then some. The way he had it reasoned out, he didn't believe it would take long to get her strung out, not if she continued to snort the extra good dope he put her way, and he was definitely going to see that she snorted most of the dope he gave them. Porky glanced at Terry and smiled, and while his mind quickly calculated up what he had in store for her, just let her keep on chipping. One of these days she would wake up with a little monkey on her back. That was a day in the future he was waiting and planning for. Wow, that shit's evil, man. Damn. You know, even crack dealers thought evil like that. That just comes with the territory. I mean, you can't be a good-hearted, good-natured drug dealer, can you? Excuse me, I had to wet my whistle a bit. Hold on, I lost my spot. How did I lose my spot? How did that happen? Oh, I really lost my spot. Pardon me. Okay. Okay, gotcha. Smokey, he bellowed. Bring me some of that loose stuff. He waddled over to his large armchair and sat down. He waited until Smokey had come and gone before he took out some white powder on top of a record cover. He pushed a large amount towards Teddy, then pulled it back and pushed a smaller amount towards Terry. You know your woman has got to snort all this stuff up, don't you, Teddy? I ain't about to have her saving none of my dope to give to you, he growled, then added more in a joking manner. I know how slick some of you try and be, so don't even try and stick me out of none of my dope. I'm up on you already. Wow. Teddy's hand shook as he reached out for the dope. She gonna snort it, Porky. You know I ain't trying to put no game on you, man. He stared at all the stuff Porky pushed over to him. He counted up the price the dope would have cost him. It was over two $10 spoons at the least. All the time the two men were talking, Terry hadn't taken her eyes off the large pile of dope that she was supposed to snort. She had never snorted so much stuff at one time. She started to shake her head, but one look at Teddy was enough to make her change her mind. He was staring at the dope as though it had hypnotized him. This is the last time, she promised herself as she took the record cover and put it on her lap. She sat back in her chair and pulled out a book of matches. Tearing a small piece off the cover, she made a small shovel and began to snort the dope from the album cover. She frowned when the bitter taste filled her throat, but she continued putting the stuff in her nose. The strong drug began to take effect almost immediately. Is she snorting heroin or coke? Can you snort heroin? I think you can. Porky began to breathe heavily as he watched her. Before she had been sitting like a little lady, her legs held tightly together. But as the drug took effect, she slowly relaxed and her beautiful golden brown legs began to open wider and wider. He stared openly. He could see the neat little slip she wore as her skirt rose up high around her thighs. He whispered hoarsely to himself. The words were incoherent as spit ran out of the corners of his mouth. The slight flashes he saw of golden thighs were enough to arouse him to erection. He wanted to masturbate, but was afraid he would frighten her. He stared in fascination. No woman had ever really made him feel as Terry did. She was so tiny, but yet so well put together. How fragile she appeared to be. Never, never had he met a woman whom he wanted to treat as though she was something rare or so delicate that she aroused a tenderness inside of him that he hadn't been aware of. Terry could feel herself drifting off. It was as if she were in a fog, yet she was aware of her surroundings. So I guess it is heroin because coke be having you up. She be running around the whole bloody apartment like a chicken with a head cut off. She noticed Porky staring at her and she tried to pull herself together. The drug was too powerful, or rather, gave her an attitude of indifference. The hell with it, she reasoned, and drifted off into a nod as her head slowly dropped down on her chest. That doesn't sound like fun. I mean, I don't really want to know, but I just can't imagine this being a good feeling if you're just gonna go to sleep. Why don't you just go to sleep? I don't know. Teddy was too occupied to give them any thought. He rolled up his sleeve and felt until he found the vein he wanted. He removed a rag from his pocket, one that he used to tie up his hair when he got it processed. Oh, so this is a conch wearing fool strung out on dope, huh? Okay. And tied it around his arm. And with slow deliberation, he stuck the needle into his arm, hitting the vein on his first try. Blood backed up in the dropper. And before he started to run the drug into his arm, a look of peaceful contentment flooded his face as the drug quickly took effect. He removed the dropper from his needle and refilled it with smack and then stuck it back in his arm. The dope invaded his mind, bringing on a false empyrean. Okay, pause, because here's a word that I've never seen before. So I'm going to look it up. And it is spelled Empyrea. I'm sorry, when I read books and I come across a word, I gotta look it up.
Empyrean.
Oh, Empyrean. And it means relating to heaven or the sky. The Empyrean domain where human will and God's will become as one. Heaven, in particular, the highest part of heaven. Oh,
Empyrean.
Empyrean. Empyrean. All right. Sorry. Well, I'm not apologizing. I just didn't know the word, never seen it before. Empyrean. The dope invaded his mind, bringing on a false Empyrean. Made him feel like he was in heaven, huh? For a few hours, he wouldn't have any worries in the world. All of his problems became insignificant as he fed the insatiable monster known to all users as their personal monkey. At one time, the sight of Teddy sticking the spike in his arm had been repugnant to Terry. Now, as the drug removed all of her unnecessary worries, she watched him out of half-opened eyes. If that was what he wanted to do, it shouldn't disturb me, she reasoned. Everybody was entitled to do his own thing, so who was she to complain? A slight disturbance occurred across the room. One of the young white boys passed out from too much stuff. As he fell out on the floor, someone yelled for Smokey. As his friend kneeled down over him, his hands moved quickly inside his partner's pockets. As Terry watched, she noticed him remove a small bankroll and stuff it into his own pocket. Put it back. The words were a sharp command. As the young white junkie looked up from the unconscious body of his friend, he saw Smokey bearing down on him. Her words came to him sharp and clear. Put it back, you son of a bitch, she yelled. Yet it seemed as though she never raised her voice. The first thing you'll tell him when he comes to is that he got beat up here. She stopped and stood on her heels, hands on her hips. You don't think I'm going to let you bring the heat down on top of us, do you? She stared, not angrily, but with a look that let him know she wouldn't be taking any shit. I wasn't going to keep it, the young addict replied. I was just going to hold it for him until he gets himself together. Smokey held out her hand. Give it here, she ordered, and nodded towards two of her housemen who had come over. Get some salt or some ice under his nuts or something, but make sure that Peck don't die on us up in here. And she tapped her foot as she waited for the young white kid to hand over the money. He'll get his money as soon as he's able to wake up enough to know he's got it back. But Peckerwood, I don't never want to see you in here again. You can wait until your friend is together and leave with him. But from now on, Honky, you find somewhere else to go. We don't have no dipping in this house. Peckerwood and Honky. The young boy looked around Smokey for Porky as he pushed the money towards her. His voice had a whine in it as he tried to explain. For real, I wasn't taking his money. I was just going to hold it. You believe me, don't you, Porky? You know I wouldn't beat my friend. Look how many times we've come up here together. His eyes held a frantic note. He stared at Porky, pleading, waiting for him to say something that would remove the exile Smokey was forcing on him. Smokey didn't even bother to wait. She watched as her two doormen work over the young kid. As soon as he started to moan, she turned on her heels. She stopped at the door of the bedroom. You heard what I said. Don't let Don't let neither one of them honkies back in again. I done told you, Porky, they ain't nothing but trouble. If that would have died, we'd have to close up shop because the police sure ain't going to accept no young white boy dying from no overdose at our house. Porky shrugged his huge shoulders and looked away. Whenever Smokey spoke, he generally listened. If it was about their business, whenever Smokey spoke, he generally listened if it was about their business, because he knew that she damn well knew what she was talking about. He turned his back on the young boy's pleas. There wasn't a junkie in the world who could make him go against something his woman had said. All right, that is the first two chapters. And altogether, there are 20 chapters in this book. No, I'm sorry, 21 chapters. Woo-wee. Will Madam Whip-Ass finish this book and go through all 21 chapters? Or will she get real busy and not finish this book and then move on to reading another book, much like she did with the Scott Peterson investigation book? But you know what? I'm going to finish this book. And I still got the Scott Peterson book right here. I'm up to chapter 16, I believe. Yep. In the Scott Peterson book. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm free for the next 2 days. I'll get back to Scott Peterson tomorrow. And once I read more of that, I'll stop Scott Peterson and I'll continue with this Donald Goines Dope Fiend book. It's holding my attention. It's pretty good now. Like I said, I know I read this book as a kid, but it seems like I'm reading it for the first time because there are things that I'm reading that I just couldn't comprehend with my 11 or 12-year-old mind. I was always reading older books. I did read books that was age appropriate, but again, you got to understand, I'm the youngest of so many siblings who were older, and they had a lot of books, and I'd be reading their books too. So it is what it is. Let me just go to the chat real quick before I leave. There's Trish. How you doing? And there's Nia. Hi, Nia. And Hot Rod. You seem new. Yo, madam, what's good? Hey, Nia. Keep helping people. It will pay off, madam. Yeah, it will. It does. There's Triple Darkness. Hey. Yeah. Rest in peace, Black Just. And my burrow is thorough. And Nia says, little E road runners. Nia, did BD make it home safely? Nia said, my mom read his books. You trying to be funny, Nia? Huh? Yes, Hot Rod, he sure did. Yep, stay out of grown folks' face. Go outside and play. Yep, that's how it was, Hot Rod. Is Trish. Opioid. Ma'am, did we ever finish Scottsville? Well, you talked about that. Okay, I'm going to get back to it. Since you're interested, I'll just read it just for you. Am I reading one of those porno books? I guess if you just popped in at the point I was reading something, I would think the same thing, but no. She said, if I could turn red, I would. She said, this sounds like some, Hot Rod said, this sounds like some Lifetime suspense movie. You from South Carolina. And boom, he busting nut. He's cracking up. I got family in Hempstead, Long Island, Jamaica, Queens. Oh, all right. Your voice is sexy, though. You got that good mouth voice. The Secticon. I listened to it about a year ago. She's something else. What you up to, Nia? Sounds like Tyra and Donna. I was on my way home. Terrible accident on the main road. Hey, Nia, be careful. Hey, finally free. Madam, where your donation link? I'm not shy. Spread the money. I'm not shy to spread the money. Oh, bless your heart, Hot Rod. Donald Goines is a shit. You got to read Whoreson also. Whoreson? Okay. Just pulled into the garage, Hot Rod. Hey, Nia, I know who you are now. How you been, my friend? No more champagne for you tonight. I'm good. How are you, Hot Rod? She says I'm toxin free. Fine, you my girl. Miss you, bud. Love you, finally free. Thank you, madam. Love you too. Finally free. Finally free. Should I come back and you call in and we go live and we talk about the latest that's been going on in the other neighborhood? You still here? Let me know real quick. Let me know. Maybe she left. Should I come back and we talk about, you fill us in about what's been going on in the other neighborhood? Gemini, my ride or die. I'll take that as a yes. I'll be back. Peace. Oh, so then I guess I got to fill you in. Not a problem. I'll be back. Okay.